Susan Smith looked like the perfect mother on TV, but she was anything but.
I want to say to my baby that your mama loves you so much, and your daddy, this whole family love you so much. And you guys have got to be strong, because you are, I just know, I just feel in my heart that you're okay.
27 years ago, that woman killed her 2 young sons, then blamed it on a black man who didn't exist. This case shocked the world, but there's more to this story than what you know from the headlines. Naked hot tub parties, sleeping with the most eligible bachelor in town, and Susan's fantasies of a life of luxury. I don't know about you, but we had to know what kind of relationship, what kind of mentality would you have to be in to kill your own kids? In this recap, you're going to hear more about the relationship she blamed for her son's murder and how she almost started a race war to get away with it. And now that she's in prison, well, she hasn't changed too much. I've got the whole story for you. Let's get into it. Good to see you. I'm Chris, and this is True Crime Recaps. On October 25th, 1994, Susan Smith took one last look at 3-year-old Michael and her 14-month-old son Alex, asleep and strapped into their car seats. Then she released the parking brake on her red Mazda, got out of the car, and watched as it rolled down a steep boat ramp into the dark waters of South Carolina's John D. Long Lake. She ran to the nearest house for help and told police a story about a carjacking and a black man who said he didn't have time to wait for her to take the kids out of their car seats while she was stopped at a traffic light. For the next 9 days, the nation watched and waited, hoping for the safe return of Michael and Alex.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please bring them home to us where they belong.
And the black community stayed vigilant. Tempers and anxiety in the small southern town were heating up. The description she'd given of the mysterious carjacker/kidnapper could be anyone, and everyone was a target for vigilantes. Then, on the 9th day, Susan finally confessed.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
So, what was happening in the days leading up to the murders and in those 9 days following the boys' deaths? 3 words: sex, betrayal, and anger. Picture a small town deep in the heart of the South. That's Union, South Carolina. In 1994, less than 10,000 people called the place home, including Susan Smith, her husband David, and their 2 sons. Like most of their friends and neighbors, Susan and David were a working-class couple. He was an assistant manager at Winn-Dixie, and she made about $6 an hour as a secretary for Conso, Union County's biggest employer and the world's largest manufacturer of decorative trim for chairs, couches, and curtains. It didn't take long for the 22-year-old mom to make it all the way to the executive offices as the personal secretary to Carrie Findley, the owner and CEO. And he wasn't opposed to a little nepotism. His son Tom was the vice president of Conso's graphic design department. But around town, he was known as the Catch. Tom was 27, handsome, single, and rich, and right away took a fancy to his father's pretty secretary, Susan. She was half out of her mind at the possibility of a future with him. At the time, Susan and David were at the rocky end of a troubled marriage. They'd married young. Susan was 19 and 2 months pregnant with Michael when they tied the knot, and things didn't get much better from there. The couple broke up, made up, and broke up over and over. She got pregnant with Alex while they were on, and by the time he was a year old, they were off again. Her relationship with Tom followed the same pattern. They got together around Christmas in 1993, but by March, he kept his distance from her after David threatened him. 6 months later, Susan had convinced him things were over with her husband, and they started dating again. Now, if this all sounds like a soap opera, just wait. You haven't heard anything yet. At the same time she was juggling her husband and her boyfriend, she was carrying on a third illicit relationship with her own stepfather, Bev Russell. Now, that's a sad story of abuse you'll hear more about later, but for now, Let's fast forward to a steamy late-night hot tub party at the Findlay family mansion on a Saturday night in October 1994. Susan and a few other drunk coworkers were nude in the bubbles when Tom found her there making out with the husband of another woman from the office. They fought about it, and he broke up with her on the spot. But that's not when she snapped and took her anger out on her sons. No, it would take 10 days of escalating crazy before that terrible night. The countdown started with the hot tub breakup on October 15th. The next morning, Susan dropped a card with a letter off at Tom's house. In it, she apologized for the hot tub thing and told him, "I will always love and care for you the rest of my life." That post-breakup letter was designed to convince him she was still wife material. After all, she had a lot more to lose than a relationship with Union's most eligible bachelor, although that was most of it. But there were other men she could have gone to for comfort. But Tom Findlay, specifically, was her ticket out of Union. Conso had offices in New York and London. Other people had been promoted into well-paying jobs that came with plenty of travel around the country and as far as England and Germany. Susan, a woman who had never been outside of Union, South Carolina, had gotten a taste of how the other half lived while she was with Tom. That was a life she would kill for. But he wasn't so easy to manipulate. He responded to her card with a letter he handed to her at the office on Monday. Let me read you a few of the more upsetting parts of it. "You are intelligent, beautiful, sensitive, understanding, and possess many other wonderful qualities that I and many other men appreciate. You will, without a doubt, make some lucky man a great wife, but unfortunately, it won't be me. Susan, I could really fall for you, but like I've told you before, there are some things about you that aren't suited for me. And yes, I am speaking about your children. The fact is, I just don't want children." Then he pointed out that he was rich and she was poor, so it would never work. But, in a nice way. Here's how he put it. "We come from two totally different environments." And then he got a little holier than thou for a man who was messing around with a married woman for months. What do you think about statements like, "You're too boy crazy for me. If you want to catch a nice guy like me one day, you have to act like a nice girl, and that doesn't include sleeping with married men. But I hope we can stay friends." Susan took his letter as less of a brush-off and more of a challenge. For the next week, she pulled out all the stops to get his attention. But on the day of the murders, October 25th, 1994, their relationship completely fell apart over the course of 3 dramatic conversations at work. It's a wonder anyone got anything done at this company. First, she told Tom her estranged husband was recording her phone calls and having her followed. Then she confessed that her stepfather had been molesting her since she was 15, but the abuse was still going on. She was worried David was going to start telling people she was sleeping with her stepfather to get back at her for divorcing him. Then she told Tom she was also sleeping with his father, her boss, Carrie Findlay. That comment didn't have the effect she thought it would. Instead of making him passionate with jealousy and demand to have her back, which is what she was hoping for, it only made him tell her he wanted nothing more to do with her. A friend told Time magazine, Susan said, "I've just lost the best friend I ever had," when she left his office. She left work early in tears and picked up the boys from daycare. From there, she went to meet a friend at the Hickory Nuts bar to ask her if she could watch Michael and Alex while she went back to the office for one more conversation with Tom. What could she possibly have to say to him at this point? The truth. Sort of. She admitted she lied about sleeping with his father. She said she just wanted to see how he would react. It didn't go well. He threw her out, and 3 hours later, she drowned her children, according to Time magazine. Over the following 9 days of lies, deceit, and racial tensions, the bodies of her sons were 18 feet below water, still strapped into their car seats. Tom's last letter to Susan floated there with them. What makes a woman tear an entire town apart over a lost relationship? Her lawyers say it was daddy issues and mommy issues. Susan had a lot of issues. They started with her parents' divorce at age 5. Her mother left her blue-collar father for a man named Beverly Russell, a well-respected stockbroker. A year later, her father committed suicide. 9 years after that, her stepfather, that community leader, started molesting her. She was only 15. At 16, she told a guidance counselor and her mother what was going on. And Bev, as he was known, didn't deny it. He also didn't stop doing it. Another year went by, and Susan told a teacher again. This time the police got involved, but her mother refused to press charges, according to Time magazine. By that time, Susan had made multiple attempts at suicide, one of which got her admitted to a psychiatric treatment center. By this time, her parents had done a mental number on her, because at that point, she was telling her therapist that the abuse was actually a consensual affair. He admitted that their twisted relationship continued for years, right up until 2 months before she murdered her sons, according to his testimony at her trial. A judgment day that might not have happened at all if it wasn't for a very smart sheriff. As I told you earlier, she was a suspect from the very beginning. If she would have been a better liar, she could have been responsible for the loss of 3 lives. Her 2 sons and the innocent black man she would have helped put behind bars. But a series of red flags signaled her guilt. Here's how it all unfolded. As she was describing the man she said forced his way into her car at gunpoint, Susan started out with very specific details about his appearance. But as the session went on, the police sketch artist said she got more vague and less sure of the answers to his questions. An innocent person describing a real attacker usually remembers details in the opposite way. So, that was the first eyebrow she raised. The next problem was with the polygraphs. As a matter of routine, both parents are questioned and polygraphed when something like this happens. In this case, David passed his lie detector test, but hers was inconclusive. She took a few more after that and passed none of them. Then there was their biggest clue. The technology didn't add up. Here's what I mean by that. Susan said a man pulled a gun on her while she and the kids were stopped at a red light, but she also said they were the only car on the road that night. Now, this is the problem with her story. That specific traffic light was always green unless there was a car coming the other way. I told you this was a small town, so it was virtually impossible for those 2 things to happen, for the light to be red and for her car to be the only one around. But they really needed a confession from her, so they turned up the heat by leaking some of their suspicions to the press. At that point, those tearful press conferences she was starring in became much more uncomfortable with the media pointing fingers and demanding to know if she was involved. Those television appearances served another purpose too. They were a permanent reminder of the way she was able to beg and plead and cry without any actual tears. By November 3rd, 1994, the police decided to bring the curtain down on her performance. The sheriff sat her down and told her he knew she was involved. There was no one else to blame. It was time to come clean. She asked him to pray with her, and then she wrote out a 2-page confession letter. She described feeling lower than she'd ever been because of her romantic and financial situation. She said, quote, "I was in love with someone very much, but he didn't love me and never would." She said she didn't want to live anymore, but she didn't want her kids to grow up without a mom. So as she was driving around after that last conversation with Tom, she decided to kill herself and them at the same time. But when the car started to roll into the lake, she changed her mind and jumped out of the car, letting them die without her. That's her story. Another theory is best described by the testimony the prison psychologist gave on the stand. Susan knew exactly what she was doing, and she started dreaming up the story she would tell the moment she got out of the car. Especially since a lot of her time after the murders was spent wondering what Tom Findlay thought of the whole thing. After she confessed, divers searched the lake for her car. They checked the lake before, but they didn't go far and deep enough to spot it. When they found the Mazda, it had flipped over, and the kids were there, drowned in their car seats. One small hand was still pressed against the window. Somehow she avoided the death penalty, but it took the jury less than 3 hours to give her life in prison. Her husband David moved out of town and eventually married again. He now has 2 daughters. Tom Findlay also got out of town, and after stints as an art director, magazine publisher, and radio host, he now spends his days as a painter. It's not clear if he ever did have children with anyone. His father sold the family's mansion in Union and stepped down as CEO. And Susan's mother finally divorced her abusive stepfather once the relationship stopped being a family secret. As for Susan, she's up for parole in 2024. It's highly unlikely that she'll get it, but she seems to be behaving herself a little better than she did in her first 15 years behind bars. She's been cited multiple times for having sex with the guards. They lost their jobs because of it. She's also had drug issues, self-harming, and suicide attempts. But these days she works on the grounds and keeps pictures of her sons close to her. What do you think about the fact that people who murder their family members are allowed to keep pictures of their victims in prison with them? Can other murderers do that? Keep pictures of their victims? While you think about that, I've got one last bizarre thing to tell you about, and this concerns another tragedy at John D. Long Lake. Get this. In 1996, 7 more people drowned there while they were looking at the memorials to Michael and Alex. This story is just plain strange and creepy. Apparently, the parking brake in their car released and it rolled down that boat ramp into the water. 4 kids and 1 adult were inside, but why the parking brake was released and why the adult in the car didn't try to hit the brakes is a mystery. But witnesses say the brake lights didn't flash once. Then it gets stranger. The kid's mother and another person drove in after them to try and save them, and they also drowned. What is going on? Only the devil knows, but the sheriff says it wasn't foul play, just a terrible accident. But after losing 7 more people to that boat ramp, they tore it apart, and today all that remains of it is just a shadowy concrete remnant under the water. And that's your recap. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, remember to subscribe and hit like so you never miss a recap. Amy and I are here with a new story for you every week. So until next time, take care.